Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for participating in this session. The idea is a bit to present you the experience of interagency real-time evaluations and how these contribute more to system-wide learning. Why system-wide learning? Because within this sector, you do have different levels. You have, as you've seen with the OECD DAC guidelines, you have the project level, the program level, the partial system level, and a system-wide level. Back in the 90s, I mean, there were two examples of major evaluation. One was on the war with genocide that Niels is very familiar with, and there was then the Tsunami Evaluation Coalition, where both Niels and Ted were working on actively among other agencies. Nowadays, there's an emergence of these joint evaluations that are partial system, but still are system-wide evaluations as such, in the interagency standing committee. And the new discipline that has evolved within this sector is the real-time evaluation. This is a bit what we're going to go through. We're going to go first to contextualizing this sector, and then we're going to go and see what these are, these types of evaluation. Where are the key characteristics, the milestones, the added value, the challenges, and the next steps. The next steps in terms also of the Achilles heel that Ted was mentioning before, that I think is one of the major challenges within the humanitarian sector. Okay, first of all, what you need to know is that real-time evaluations is a subset of humanitarian evaluations as such. It's not the whole set. And humanitarian evaluation itself is a subset of development evaluation. So you're narrowing a bit down the scope. The other element is that, just to get a flare of what we're talking about, is you need to compare what are humanitarian evaluations and development evaluations. Humanitarian evaluations are done in fast-changing contexts that are highly complex, where there is a huge time pressure, where there's political interference. It's high on the media, especially for those emergencies that are more sexy. The other element that you need to know about is that there's generally poor monitoring, and there's often lack of baseline within the humanitarian sector. And another element also that has triggered change back in 2005 was the introduction of the humanitarian reform. So that meant that clusters were rolled out, so there are ways of intervening, there's a role of the humanitarian coordinator, et cetera, et cetera. It's a highly dynamic area. As you can see overall in terms of ODA, it's getting up to a 10%. Right now in Finland, this corresponds to a 20% of the ODA, to give you a sample. And within this, real-time evaluations are one of the central pillars of what is done in humanitarian evaluation nowadays. Okay, first of all, what is this? It provides immediate feedback, and it's very participatory as exercise. There are multiple feedback loops at different levels that are done throughout the humanitarian system. The humanitarian system being composed by donors, by the Red Cross movement, by the UN agencies, by NGOs, by national actors, and you do that at multiple levels. You do that in provinces, you do that at headquarters, and the other element, it also supports the operation to adjust and also introduce corrective measures to improve the performance, to improve the response. Now, you're in the middle of an action and you need to introduce the learning. So this is the essence of the real time. It's not afterwards. You're not intervening with an evaluation when the corpse is not moving anymore. It's not a post-mortem that you're doing in medical terms. You're doing a quick analysis of what is going on right now. And you want to unlock operational bottlenecks. What are the key characteristics of this? You're trying to improve results during operations. There are a variety within the humanitarian system of real-time evaluations. They're single agency and they're interagency. The interagency look at the whole process right now, nowadays, of specific disasters. There are about 10 that have been launched to date. And I've worked about on 4. So what are the characteristics of this? It's agile, it's light, it's very quick, it's very fast. Best case scenario, you deliver the report before you leave the field. This lasts around 6 to 8 weeks, roughly, to give you an idea in terms of timeline, as compared to longer-term evaluations that we've been involved in humanitarian aid, around 9 months or 12. There's a huge growth, there's an exponential growth in this type of evaluations nowadays, both in terms of numbers. Take the Haiti example. In the first 10 months, you had 10 evaluations that were carried out, 10 real-time evaluations, and just 1 that was interagency. Number of participants, the scope is broadening up very quickly. And now, at interagency level, you have triggering mechanisms that are in place. That means above a certain thresholds of flash appeals, UN flash appeals, and above a certain caseload of affected population, these evaluations are triggered and launched on the ground. This gives you a bit of a milestone of what has been done. On the left, what you can see is the pilot phase, and the pilot phase was originally run out in 2008 after testing it in Mozambique, in Pakistan, Mozambique floods, Pakistan floods, and the Myanmar also floods. All, as you see, natural disaster settings. Then there was a revision of all this, and there were automatic triggers introduced that I was describing before. There was an RTE that managed to be triggered 3 months after the disaster. That's the case of the Haiti RTE at interagency level. And there was a second RTE focusing on a major conflict, a major chronic emergency that was following the Pakistan offensive under the Taliban front in the Fatah region and the KPK region. Some of these were not launched because of funding problems at the time. Now, funding progressively is being built in. What is the added value of these types of evaluation within the humanitarian sector and system? Well, first of all, they allow to bridge the gap between monitoring and evaluation, because often monitoring is absent within the humanitarian system. So bringing in a real-time evaluation that is an iterative process allows to get a quick and dirty Polaroid of the situation and to monitor the evolution of the situation. You can have several real-time evaluations going on within a system. If you do them jointly as joint evaluations, you have a broader scope. You have an economy of scale. There are a number of usefulness, actually, that Niels have already highlighted in joint evaluations that I will not go through, but that are more proper to development evaluations. The characteristic is the timeliness. I told you the patient's heart is still beating when you're doing these kinds of evaluation. And the other element is the interactivity. It's multiple feedback loops at different levels: provinces, capital, and then headquarters. Amazingly, this was one of the greatest experiences we had during the Pakistan floods, where we had this validation process involving all the actors of the system, and this validation was done in a bottom-up fashion. So we started in the 4 major provinces affected by the floods. 2010, 1/5 of the country was underwater. And we validated that with all the actors. We came up at Islamabad level, and there was not a single question mark about the findings, conclusions, and recommendations. It was really grounded on about 2,700 pieces of evidence out of 1,000 interviews after visiting 20 locations. So they found the information very useful because it was a reality check. It was a ground check. It was based on what was happening in the country now, a slice in time and in space that allowed to reorient the operation, the whole humanitarian system operation, into a recovery mode. It was still functioning in emergency mode 5 months after, while there was a need already to shift into recover and to devolve the authority and the responsibility of the operation to the government. And there were a number of flaws in the response that this allowed also to address. The other element is peer-to-peer learning, especially at interagency level. There's a mutual capacity building. There's a mutual accountability among the different stakeholders that sit in the room, that think through the conclusions and recommendations and that validate the process. Because they already are developing an action plan to implement those recommendations. We're not waiting for the report to come out or to be validated. It's been right now in the middle of the crisis that people are saying what we need to do and what we need to prioritize. So you're really shifting the focus. You're mirroring a situation in a certain moment that is a very short moment in time, and you're saying, okay, that's the overall direction. The thing to be useful, we need the endorsement of the humanitarian system, and that is a key challenge. You need to build progressively the validation, but also the recognition and the validity of the information. It can't be from outside. There's another element that is very useful from these interagency evaluations is that they reduce the overall number of evaluation exercises that represent a burden, both for the local population, the people working and involved in a response operation, especially when you're in the middle of emergency. Hi, what are these silly questions you're asking me when I'm supposed to do life-saving operations? And that can end up being a wrong time in evaluation if you're not doing that properly. And as a colleague said from UNHCR, Jeff Crisp, used to say that everybody needed to fit in a Land Cruiser because if not, it would be too cumbersome. What are the challenges? There's a growing focus on single agency RTEs. There's a concept inflation. There's a risk of these becoming ritualistic exercises because progressively each agency has its own accountability needs. They're starting to ask both the donors, but also the own constituencies of organizations. We have our single accountability needs. We need to report to our board, we need to report to our donors, we need to report to our peers. But the interagency brought in much more of the scope. The other element is the timeliness and the timing. When triggered too late, these are not real-time evaluations anymore. They become more traditional evaluations, more articulated, more complex. The other element and the other challenge is the ownership of the process. And that is triggered by that is challenged by who triggers the evaluation. And often, who triggers the evaluations are HQ, and it's not the field. Back in 2007, when we did the interagency real-time evaluation in Mozambique, that was triggered by the field. It was owned by the field. In Pakistan, during the displacement, also they triggered the evaluation. So there's really a need to have the ownership, because if it comes in from HQ, it's more focused and more perceived as an accountability exercise. So you need to prove to the HQ, and it's more inquiry. The other element is capacity. There's a limited human resource pool that has been doing these more systemic. You're looking at the overall forest. You're not looking at the leaf. You're not looking at the project. You're looking at the whole environment, the whole ecosystem in this humanitarian field, and even if it's small compared to development, is quite composite and complex. And there are very few real-time evaluations in complex emergencies. Next steps, you need to keep real-time evaluations focused. They should bridge the gap that exists between monitoring and evaluation. You need to build participation and ownership, where the evaluator at the end acts as a facilitator in the process. It's not something that you impose, especially when you're validating the findings, conclusions, and recommendations. You need to outline progressively the benefits of what are these real-time evaluations, as in any evaluation process, for them to be useful. The element that you need to have, especially, is trace their impact. If you look at the interagency real-time evaluations today, the UN transformative agenda, you will see the track with those evaluations plus the cluster evaluation, the CERF evaluation, have a direct link on what are the priority actions of the UN transformative agenda. They've contributed to policy, but they've also contributed to process on the ground. But you need to show that also to countries, because countries are progressively more and more exposed to disasters, and disasters of large size, as you know. mechanisms need to be in place, and you need to have resources. There have been a number of real-time evaluations that have been canceled in the past because they do not have sufficient resources beforehand. Yeah. Okay. And just in terms of conclusion, and to be useful, these real-time evaluations will either be a dynamic tool that is built into what is decision-making, or it will be a momentary fashion. That also depends on a number of factors and of engagement of stakeholders. There needs to be the participation. It needs to be owned by the field people. It needs to be also focused on learning. That's the key element. It needs to trigger learning, but not just learning for people sitting in offices far away from the action. You need to foster learning on the ground, and very quickly. And you need a strong evidence chain, but that's usual. I mean, that's the usual thing in all evaluations. On the opposite side, if it's just owned by the HQ, if it's just focused on accountability, and if it's random and reactive, it will be just a momentary fashion. Thank you.
Thanks, Riccardo. Thanks very much, Riccardo.